The lemonade stand and the invisible barriers. Jasmine Carter had always been different. At 16, while most of her friends spent their free time hanging out at the mall or scrolling through social media, she was focused on her future and the community around her. Oakwood, the suburban town she lived in, had seen its fair share of change. Once a quiet, homogeneous neighborhood, it had become more diverse over the years, leading to unspoken tension beneath its surface. Jasmine felt it too, but she was determined to rise above it. With a heart set on helping others, she had decided to set up a lemonade stand to raise money for a local charity. It wasn't just any charity, though. The funds would go to support a community center that provided care and services for disabled children. To Jasmine, it was more than just selling lemonade. It was about making a real difference, even if it started small. This was her contribution to a world that, in her eyes, needed more kindness and hope. Jasmine lived in a modest home with her father, Marcus Carter, a man she admired deeply. Marcus worked for the government, though he rarely talked about what he did. All Jasmine knew was that her father was a figure of authority, someone respected, but also someone who carried the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had taught her many lessons about strength, resilience, and, above all, standing up for what was right. Jasmine, Marcus would say, the world isn't always fair. There will be times when people won't see you for who you really are, but you have to know your worth. No one can take that from you. Those words echoed in her mind now as she stood behind her lemonade stand, her heart full of optimism. The stand itself was simple, a folding table, a bright yellow cloth, and a sign she had painted herself. Lemonade for charity, $1. Support disabled children. It wasn't flashy, but it didn't need to be. The cause was clear, and Jasmine was confident that people would understand the importance of what she was doing. The day was warm, the sun hanging lazily in the sky, casting long shadows over the quiet suburban streets. Oakwood had always been a peaceful town, at least on the surface. But Jasmine had noticed the changes in recent years. The influx of new families, some from different racial and ethnic backgrounds, had brought about an undercurrent of unease among some of the longtime residents. There were whispered conversations, side glances, and an unspoken divide that seemed to grow wider by the day. But Jasmine believed in Oakwood. She believed that her town could be better, that people could come together if given the chance. As she set up her stand that afternoon, a few neighbors passed by, smiling and waving. Some stopped to buy a cup of lemonade, dropping $1 or $2 into the donation jar. Jasmine smiled and thanked them, feeling her heart swell with each contribution. The money wasn't just for charity. It was a symbol of what her community could do if they united for a common cause. After an hour or so, Jasmine saw a group of boys approaching from down the street. She recognized them immediately. They were on the football team at her high school, known for their athleticism and loud, often obnoxious, behavior. Jasmine had never had any direct issues with them, but she knew their type. Boys who thrived on their popularity and liked to show off in front of their friends. Her stomach tightened a little as they drew closer. "Well, well, well," said the tallest boy, Brad, with a smirk as they reached her stand. "Look what we've got here. Little Miss Do-Gooder selling lemonade, huh?" Jasmine straightened her shoulders, forcing herself to stay calm. "That's right," she replied, her voice steady. "It's for charity. Would you like to buy a cup? All proceeds go to the community center for disabled kids." Brad's smirk widened. "Charity, huh? Isn't that cute?" he said, glancing at his friends, who snickered. "You know, we're raising money too. For new football uniforms. At least that's something useful." Jasmine felt her face flush with anger, but she kept her composure. "Helping kids who can't afford health care is useful," she said firmly. "Maybe more useful than some new uniforms." One of the other boys, Ryan, chimed in, "Come on, Brad. Let's go. It's just a stupid lemonade stand." But Brad wasn't ready to leave just yet. He leaned in closer, his tone mocking. "Why don't you just give up, Jasmine? No one cares about your little stand." People want to help winners, not losers. Jasmine's heart pounded, but she stood her ground. I'm not giving up, she said, her voice unwavering. Because this isn't about winning or losing. It's about helping people who need it. And that's more important than anything you're talking about. For a moment, Brad didn't respond. The boys around him shuffled awkwardly, clearly not expecting Jasmine to stand up to them like this. After a tense pause, Brad rolled his eyes and muttered something under his breath before turning to walk away. The other boys followed, and within moments, they were gone. Jasmine let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She had done it. She had stood up for herself, for the kids she was raising money for, and for her community. And though her heart was still racing, she felt a surge of pride. Her father would be proud, he thought. Marcus had always told her that doing the right thing wasn't always easy, but it was always worth it. As she watched the boys walk away, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out and smiled when she saw her father's name on the screen. She answered the call, her voice bright. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, sweetheart." Marcus's deep voice came through the phone. "How's the lemonade stand going?" "It's good," Jasmine replied, glancing at her donation jar, which was slowly filling up with bills and coins. "I've had a few customers, and I think we're going to raise a good amount for the community center." "That's my girl," Marcus said, pride evident in his voice. "I knew you'd do great." Jasmine hesitated for a moment, then added, "Actually, I just had to deal with some kids from school. They were trying to give me a hard time." "What happened?" Marcus asked, his tone shifting slightly, a hint of concern creeping in. Jasmine recounted the encounter with Brad and his friends, her voice steady as she explained how she had stood her ground. "I'm proud of you, Jasmine," Marcus said when she finished. "You handled that exactly how you should have. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong or that what you're doing isn't important. You're making a difference, even if they don't see it." Jasmine smiled, feeling the warmth of her father's words wrap around her like a protective shield. "Thanks, Dad," she said softly. "I just want to help." "And you are," Marcus assured her. "Just remember, not everyone will understand what you're doing. Some people might try to tear you down because they're afraid of change. But you keep doing what you're doing. You're stronger than they are." Jasmine nodded, even though her father couldn't see her. "I will, Dad. I promise." They talked for a few more minutes before Jasmine ended the call, slipping her phone back into her pocket. She looked out at the quiet street, the sun now beginning to dip lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the houses and trees. She wasn't just selling lemonade. She was standing for something bigger, something that mattered. And she wasn't going to let anyone, no matter how big or intimidating, take that away from her. Little did she know, the real challenge was yet to come, and it wouldn't just be about standing up to some school bullies. Soon, Jasmine would find herself in the middle of a confrontation that would test her strength, her courage, and everything she believed in. But she was ready. She had to be. Roots of power. Jasmine Carter's lemonade stand wasn't just a stand. It was a statement. The bright yellow tablecloth and the sign with the painted letters, "Lemonade for Charity, $1 to help disabled kids," marked a point of light in a world where she often felt unseen. But even more than that, this was her first taste of personal power. For 16-year-old Jasmine, power wasn't about dominance or control. It was about change. As the sun dipped lower into the horizon, casting a soft golden hue over the suburban street, Jasmine felt both excitement and unease simmering inside her. She had big dreams, dreams that reached far beyond Oakwood High School or even the town itself. She imagined herself in 10 years, wearing a white coat, tending to children in underfunded clinics, traveling to impoverished areas where basic health care was a luxury. It was her calling. But the path to that future was long and fraught with hurdles, many of which she knew had less to do with her abilities and more with how people saw her. The group of white boys who had mocked her lemonade stand earlier in the day lingered in her thoughts, though she had handled their cruel comments well. Their words stayed with her longer than she wanted to admit. Why was it so hard for people to see the humanity in others? She shook her head, casting off the doubt that tried to creep in. She would stay focused on the good she could do. Her thoughts were interrupted by the arrival of a tall man in a crisp business suit. The man strolled toward the stand with purpose, and something about his presence was arresting. He carried himself with confidence, and Jasmine felt an odd familiarity, though she was sure she'd never seen him before. "Afternoon," he said, flashing a smile as he reached into his wallet. "What do I owe for the lemonade?" $1, sir," Jasmine responded, her usual confidence returning with the interaction. The man handed her a $5 bill. "Keep the change. It's for a good cause." He took the cup, smiling down at her. "I've seen a lot of lemonade stands in my day, but not many that raise money for something as important as this. Are you doing this all on your own?" Jasmine felt a surge of pride. "Yes, I wanted to raise money for the community center. They'd been struggling to keep the after-school programs running for disabled kids, and I thought I could help." The man's smile widened as if he was impressed. "That's very commendable, Jasmine. Keep it up. You never know how much good even a small effort can do." Jasmine thanked him, feeling buoyed by the man's support. As he turned to leave, she couldn't shake the feeling that she knew him somehow. Before she could ask, a familiar voice called out from behind her. "Hey, Jasmine." Jasmine turned to see her best friend, Camille, jogging up the street with a wide grin plastered on her face. Camille had always been Jasmine's go-to for everything, whether it was studying for finals, talking about boys, or venting about the daily frustrations of life in Oakwood. Camille was everything Jasmine wasn't: bold, unfiltered, and always ready to stir up trouble for the sake of fun. "What are you doing here?" Jasmine asked, happy to see her friend but wary of Camille's mischievous energy. "I came to see your famous lemonade stand in action." Camille laughed, her brown curls bouncing as she leaned over the table, inspecting the setup. "Look at you, out here trying to change the world one cup at a time." "More like $1 at a time," Jasmine quipped, but she couldn't help but smile. Camille had a way of making everything seem light, even when it wasn't. "So, how's it going? Any trouble?" Camille asked, her eyes narrowing slightly as if she could sense the underlying tension Jasmine had been feeling. "Just the usual," Jasmine said, brushing off the earlier encounter. "Some of the guys from school stopped by to give me a hard time, but I handled it." Camille's playful demeanor shifted. "Who? Was it those football idiots? Tell me who it was, and I'll take care of it." Jasmine laughed. "It's fine, Cam. Seriously, I just need to focus on what's important." Camille crossed her arms. "I know you can handle yourself, but it still pisses me off. They act like they own this town." "It's not just them," Jasmine said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "It's everything. Sometimes it feels like no matter how hard I try, people will only ever see me as the black girl from Oakwood. Not the girl who wants to become a doctor. Not the girl who wants to make a difference." Camille's face softened. "I get it, but you can't let them define you, Jay. You're better than that." "I know, but it's hard sometimes," Jasmine admitted, her voice quieter now. Camille nodded in understanding. "Well, if anyone can break through all that bullshit, it's you. I'm sure of it." Just as the conversation was about to lighten, a loud car engine roared from down the street. Both girls looked up as a black SUV turned the corner, moving far too fast for a residential area. It screeched to a stop just a few feet from the lemonade stand. Jasmine's heart jumped into her throat as the vehicle's tinted windows rolled down. To her shock, it was Police Chief Ryan Callahan behind the wheel, his cold blue eyes locked onto Jasmine as if she were some kind of criminal. The last time Jasmine had seen the chief was when he visited her school last year for a community policing day, which had turned into more of a show of force day. Chief Callahan was infamous in Oakwood for his heavy-handed tactics and barely disguised disdain for the town's growing black and immigrant communities. Jasmine had never had a personal run-in with him, but his reputation preceded him. Beside him sat Officer Malcolm Green, the town's only black police officer. He looked just as uncomfortable as Jasmine felt. "What's going on here?" Callahan barked, stepping out of the SUV. His eyes darted from the lemonade stand to Jasmine, his mouth set in a hard line. "Do you have a permit to operate this stand?" Jasmine's stomach dropped. A permit? For a lemonade stand? She had never heard of anyone needing a permit for something like this, especially not in Oakwood. The kids who set up lemonade stands in the summer never faced any trouble. But Jasmine knew this wasn't about a permit. Her hands clenched the edge of the table as she tried to keep her voice steady. "No, sir. I didn't think I needed one. I'm just raising money for the community center." Callahan's face darkened. "Ignorance of the law isn't an excuse. You need a permit to sell anything on public property." Camille stepped forward, her usual fire igniting. "Seriously, it's a lemonade stand, not a hot dog cart. Give her a break." Callahan shot Camille a glare. "This isn't your business, young lady. Step back." Jasmine's pulse quickened. The situation was spiraling out of control, and she wasn't sure how to pull it back. She thought of her father's words, about staying calm, speaking clearly, and standing her ground. She could feel Camille bristling beside her, ready to explode. But Jasmine put a hand on her friend's arm, silently asking her to stand down. "Officer Callahan," Jasmine said, doing her best to sound respectful despite the anger bubbling inside her. "I didn't know about the permit. If I need to stop, I'll pack up and go." Callahan's eyes narrowed. "You're not just packing up. You're coming with me. Selling without a permit is a violation, and we take those seriously around here." "What?" Camille exclaimed, her voice incredulous. "You're arresting her?" "For selling lemonade. This is ridiculous." Jasmine's heart was pounding now. This couldn't be happening. All she wanted to do was raise money for charity. And now she was being treated like a criminal. Her father's voice echoed in her mind. "If you ever need me, call. No matter what." Before she could respond, Callahan reached for the handcuffs on his belt. Jasmine's breath hitched in her throat, panic flaring in her chest. This was escalating way too fast. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers trembling as she scrolled to her father's number. She pressed call, praying he would pick up. 2 rings. 3 rings. "Hey, sweetheart," Marcus Carter's voice came through, calm and steady. "Everything okay?" "Dad," Jasmine whispered, her voice cracking. "I need you. The police are here, and they're trying to arrest me. Please, come quickly." On the other end of the line, there was a pause that seemed to stretch into eternity, before her father's voice turned serious. "I'm on my way." Jasmine held the phone to her chest as she watched Callahan and Officer Green approach. The chief looked at her with cold, calculating eyes, while Officer Green's face was etched with discomfort. Camille stood beside her, seething, ready to launch into a full-blown argument. But Jasmine knew this was bigger than just her lemonade stand. This was about something deeper, a power struggle, an unspoken battle over who had the right to take up space in this town. Her father was coming, and she had a feeling that when he arrived, things were about to change. But for better or worse, she couldn't say. All she knew was that the lemonade stand had become something more, a flashpoint in a battle for justice, respect, and dignity. The storm before the calm. Jasmine stood frozen, her pulse pounding in her ears as she watched Chief Callahan approach with handcuffs dangling menacingly from his belt. The low hum of the SUV's engine seemed deafening in the oppressive silence that now hung over the street, every neighbor peeking out from behind curtains and cracked doors. This wasn't just a scene. It was a spectacle. Beside her, Camille's fists were clenched, her body tense as if ready to lunge forward and protect her friend. But Jasmine knew that wasn't the answer. She had to stay calm, had to keep her composure, no matter how much the fear and anger roiled inside her like a brewing storm. Chief Callahan was only a few steps away now, his lips pressed into a thin, hard line. He exuded power, the kind that came from years of exercising authority with impunity, of knowing that he held the law in his hands and could twist it as he saw fit. Officer Green trailed behind him, his gaze fixed on the ground, as if embarrassed to be a part of this. Jasmine caught his eyes for a brief moment, just long enough to see the conflict there. He didn't want this, but wanting wasn't the same as acting, and Jasmine knew that in this moment, Green was powerless to help her. "Don't move," Callahan ordered, his voice sharp and cold. Jasmine's legs felt like they were made of lead, and she fought the instinct to back away, to run, to scream for help. But what good would it do? In Oakwood, it didn't matter how loudly she screamed. Too many people saw her skin before they saw her humanity. Instead, she forced herself to speak, her voice trembling but steady enough. "Sir, I told you, I didn't know about the permit. I'll shut the stand down, and I'll pay the fine. There's no need for this." Callahan's face didn't soften. "You think this is just about the permit. This is about following the law. You broke it, and now you face the consequences." Jasmine opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, Camille stepped forward, her voice a fiery spark in the tense air. "This is bullshit. You're just mad because Jasmine's out here doing something positive, and you can't stand it. You never harassed the white kids with their lemonade stands. This is about power, not the law." Jasmine's stomach dropped. Camille was right. Of course, she was. But Jasmine knew her best friend's righteous anger wouldn't help the situation. If anything, it would make it worse. Callahan's eyes flashed with anger, and he stepped closer to Camille, towering over her like a storm about to break. "You need to watch your mouth, young lady. You don't want to make things harder for your friend here." "I don't care." Camille shot back, her voice unwavering. "We both know what this is. You don't care about a permit. You just don't want to see Jasmine succeed." "Cam, please," Jasmine whispered, her heart racing. She couldn't let this escalate. Not now. Not when her father was on his way. But Camille was beyond reasoning. She was like a lit match thrown into a pool of gasoline, ready to burn everything down if it meant standing up for her friend. Just as Chief Callahan opened his mouth to respond, a deep, familiar voice cut through the tension. "Chief Callahan." Jasmine's head whipped around, and relief washed over her as she saw her father, Marcus Carter, striding down the sidewalk. He wasn't running, but his long, purposeful strides made it clear that he was ready for whatever confrontation awaited him. His broad shoulders and calm but intense demeanor commanded attention, and for a moment, even Callahan seemed to hesitate. "Mr. Carter," Callahan said, turning slightly to face Jasmine's father, "this doesn't concern you." Marcus stopped just a few feet from the chief, his eyes hard as steel. "It absolutely concerns me. That's my daughter you're harassing." Jasmine had never been so grateful to see her father, but at the same time, her anxiety spiked. She knew how these situations could go. Her father wasn't a man to back down easily, and Callahan didn't seem like the type to admit when he was wrong. This could get ugly. "Your daughter is breaking the law," Callahan said, his voice tight with authority. "I have every right to detain her." "Detain her for what?" Marcus asked, his voice calm but laced with a quiet anger that Jasmine knew too well. "For selling lemonade to raise money for disabled kids, or for being a young black girl in your town." Callahan's eyes narrowed. "I don't appreciate your tone, Carter. I don't appreciate you threatening my daughter over something as trivial as a lemonade stand." Marcus shot back. "You've never shut down any of the white kids' stands. I've seen them on this very street without a permit, and you didn't bat an eye. So I'll ask you again, what is this really about?" For a moment, the air was so thick with tension that Jasmine felt like she couldn't breathe. Camille had gone silent beside her eyes wide as she watched the confrontation unfold. Officer Green stood awkwardly a few feet away, clearly wanting to be anywhere but here. Callahan's face flushed red, and for a second, Jasmine thought he might actually snap. But then, as if something clicked in his mind, he stepped back, straightening his posture. "You think you're being clever, Carter," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "This isn't a racial issue. This is about the law. If your daughter wants to play entrepreneur, she needs to follow the rules like everyone else." "She's 16 years old, Chief," Marcus said, his voice cool but firm. "She's not running a business. She's trying to do some good in this community. You're the one making this into something it's not." Callahan's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, Officer Green finally stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Chief, maybe we should let this one go. It's a lemonade stand. No harm's been done." Callahan shot Green a look that could have melted steel. "You don't tell me how to do my job, officer." "I'm not," Green said, his voice steady but clearly on edge. "I'm just saying, maybe this isn't worth the trouble. We could just give her a warning. Tell her to get a permit next time." For a long, agonizing moment, Callahan stood there, glaring at Green, at Marcus, at Jasmine. She could feel the weight of his authority bearing down on her, the way he looked at her like she was something beneath him, something to be crushed underfoot. But then, to her surprise, he took a deep breath, and his expression shifted, just slightly. "Fine," Callahan muttered, slipping the handcuffs back into his belt. "We'll let this go, for now. But I don't want to see this stand here tomorrow, or we'll have a different conversation." He turned on his heel, his boots crunching against the pavement as he stormed back to the SUV. Officer Green gave Jasmine a brief, apologetic glance before following Callahan into the vehicle. The SUV roared to life, and within seconds, they were gone, leaving Jasmine, her father, and Camille standing in the wake of what had almost been a disaster. Jasmine's legs felt like jelly, and she had to grip the edge of the lemonade stand to steady herself. She let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her heart still racing in her chest. Her father stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder, his face softening. "You okay, sweetheart?" Jasmine nodded, but she couldn't find her voice. Her emotions were swirling inside her. Relief, anger, fear, pride. It was too much, all at once. Camille let out a long breath, shaking her head. "I can't believe that just happened." "Are you serious? Over a lemonade stand?" "Yeah," Jasmine muttered, finally finding her voice. "It's never just about the lemonade." Her father knelt down beside her, his eyes full of the kind of love and concern only a parent could have. "I'm proud of you, Jasmine. You stood your ground, but you don't have to fight every battle alone. Remember that." Jasmine swallowed the lump in her throat. "I know, Dad. Thank you for coming. I didn't know what else to do." Marcus smiled, but there was a sadness behind his eyes, the kind that came from years of fighting the same battles over and over. "We do what we have to, baby. But you're stronger than you realize. And this world, it's gonna have to reckon with that one day." Jasmine's heart swelled at his words, but at the same time, the weight of everything that had just happened pressed down on her like a ton of bricks. She looked around at the now empty street, the neighbors who had been watching from their windows slowly retreating into their homes. The silence that followed felt hollow, as if the air itself had been stripped of its warmth. "I'm taking the stand down," Jasmine said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper, "at least for now. I need to think." Her father nodded, understanding without question. "Take your time, but don't let this stop you, Jasmine. You've got a good heart, and the world needs more of that." Jasmine's eyes stung with unshed tears, but she blinked them away, refusing to let the moment break her. She wasn't done, not by a long shot. This was just the beginning. Because if there was one thing she had learned today, it was that standing up for what's right wasn't always easy. Sometimes it meant facing down people who had more power, more authority. Sometimes it meant being scared out of your mind and doing it anyway. But that's what courage was, wasn't it? And Jasmine Carter, she was just getting started. A spark ignites. The days after the confrontation with Chief Callahan dragged by in a blur for Jasmine. She had taken the lemonade stand down, just as she said she would. And the once vibrant, bustling corner that had been her makeshift business was now eerily quiet. The colorful signs she and Camille had painted sat rolled up in her garage, gathering dust. The jars of lemon juice and sugar she'd stocked for future sales sat untouched on the counter, reminders of what had happened. She spent a lot of time in her room after that day, her thoughts swirling like a storm she couldn't control. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Chief Callahan sneer, felt the cold press of fear tightening in her chest. But underneath that fear, something else was growing. Something hotter, fiercer. Anger. Not just at Callahan, but at the whole system that allowed people like him to treat her and others like her as less than. Less deserving. Less important. Less human. It had been simmering under the surface for years, but now, after what had happened, it was boiling over. And Jasmine wasn't alone in her anger. Camille, ever the firebrand, had refused to let the issue die quietly. She had told the story to every single person she knew, teachers, classmates, neighbors, anyone who would listen. And people were listening. Slowly but surely, word spread throughout the school and the community. What had started as a small lemonade stand had turned into something much bigger. On Friday afternoon, 4 days after the incident, Jasmine was lying on her bed, staring blankly at the ceiling, when her phone buzzed beside her. She glanced at it lazily, expecting it to be another text from Camille, who had been checking in on her constantly. But instead, it was a text from a number she didn't recognize. "Hey Jasmine, my name's Leo. You don't know me, but I heard about what happened with the lemonade stand. We're organizing a protest at the town square tomorrow at noon. It's time to stand up. You in?" Jasmine's heart skipped a beat as she read the message. A protest. She sat up, rereading the text just to make sure she wasn't imagining it. She had never been to a protest before, let alone been the reason for one. Her stomach churned with nerves, but at the same time, a flicker of excitement sparked inside her. She quickly tapped out a reply. "I'm in. What do I need to do?" Leo responded almost immediately. "Just show up. We've got signs and everything ready to go. It's time to let them know they can't keep treating us like this." Jasmine stared at her phone, her heart thudding in her chest. She didn't know Leo, didn't even know who we referred to, but suddenly it didn't matter. The idea that people were willing to stand up for her, for what had happened, felt like a jolt of electricity surging through her veins. This was bigger than the lemonade stand. It was about something more. She quickly texted Camille, who was unsurprisingly ecstatic about the idea. "Hell yes. We'll be there, front and center. Time to let Oakwood know we're done taking their crap." That night, Jasmine barely slept. Thoughts of the protest filled her mind, bouncing around like fireflies in the dark. What would it be like? Would people actually show up? Would it make a difference? By morning, she was a bundle of nerves, but there was no turning back now. Camille arrived at her house around 11 a.m., buzzing with energy and clutching a massive poster board with bold black letters that read, "Juste ici for JS9." Jasmine couldn't help but smile at her best friend's enthusiasm. "That's a lot," she said with a chuckle, glancing at the sign. Camille grinned. "Go big or go home, right? Besides, this isn't just about you anymore. This is about all of us. If we don't stand up now, they'll keep pushing us down." Jasmine nodded, feeling a swell of gratitude for Camille's unwavering support. She knew her friend was right. This protest wasn't just about her lemonade stand. It was about challenging the system that had always treated people like her as second-class citizens. By the time they arrived at the town square, a small crowd had already gathered, and more people were trickling in by the minute. Jasmine felt her heart flutter with a mix of anxiety and anticipation. There were students from her school, teachers, community members, some of whom she recognized, others she didn't. And at the center of it all, a tall boy with dark curly hair and a megaphone in hand stood directing people where to go. Jasmine guessed that must be Leo. "Yo, Jasmine," Camille called out, pointing to the boy. "That's gotta be him, right?" Jasmine nodded, her palms sweating as they approached the gathering. As soon as Leo spotted her, he grinned and made his way over, extending a hand. "You must be Jasmine," he said, his voice steady but filled with energy. "I'm Leo. It's good to meet you." Jasmine shook his hand, feeling the calluses on his fingers. He had the air of someone who had been through his own battles, someone who knew what it meant to fight for something. "Thanks for doing this," Jasmine said, her voice slightly shaky. "I didn't expect." "Hey, don't thank me," Leo interrupted, smiling. "This is all of us. You sparked something, Jasmine. What happened to you isn't okay, and it's time we make sure everyone knows it." Jasmine felt her chest tighten at his words. She had never seen herself as the kind of person who could spark a movement, but hearing Leo say it like that made her realize just how much power she, and people like her, truly had. The crowd continued to grow, and soon there were close to 50 people gathered around the square, holding signs and chanting, "Justice for Jasmine," and "End the harassment," echoed off the buildings, drawing curious glances from passers-by. People honked their car horns in support as they drove by, and others joined in, swelling the ranks of the protesters. At the front of the crowd, Leo raised his megaphone and began to speak, his voice ringing out over the crowd. "We're here today because of injustice," he called out, his voice strong and passionate. "We're here because too many of us have been pushed down, silenced, and treated as less than. But today we stand up. We stand up for Jasmine. We stand up for every black and brown kid who's been made to feel like they don't belong in this town. We stand up for justice." The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices filling the air with a sense of unity and purpose. Jasmine's heart swelled as she stood there, surrounded by people who were standing with her, standing for her. For the first time in days, the weight she had been carrying felt lighter, as if the burden wasn't hers to bear alone anymore. As the chants grew louder, Jasmine felt a hand on her shoulder and turned to see her father standing beside her. He wasn't holding a sign, but the look in his eyes said everything. He was proud of her for standing up, for not letting fear or intimidation silence her. "You good, baby?" he asked quietly, his deep voice cutting through the noise. Jasmine nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "Yeah, Dad, I'm good." Together, they stood at the edge of the crowd, watching as the movement swelled around them. Camille stood beside Jasmine, her arm looped through hers, grinning from ear to ear. For a brief moment, it felt like everything was possible, that change was within reach. But as the protests carried on, a new wave of anxiety crept into Jasmine's chest. She knew not everyone in Oakwood would be supportive. There were people who saw her protests not as a call for justice, but as a threat to the status quo. And she knew that Chief Callahan wasn't the kind of man to take this lying down. She didn't have to wait long to see how right she was. As the chants reached a fever pitch, Jasmine's eyes caught sight of a familiar black SUV rolling up to the edge of the square. Her heart clenched as Chief Callahan stepped out, flanked by 2 other officers. His face was a mask of cold fury, and as he approached the crowd, a hush fell over the protesters. Jasmine's pulse quickened as Callahan's gaze locked onto her. The storm wasn't over, it was only just beginning. The storm breaks. As Chief Callahan strode toward the protest, the energy in the square shifted, like the charged air before a thunderstorm. The chants faded, and a tense silence settled over the crowd. Jasmine felt her stomach flip, her hands trembling at her sides. She couldn't look away from him. His expression was unreadable, stone-faced, but the tension in his jaw gave him away. Camille noticed too. She leaned close to Jasmine, her voice low but sharp. "Stay calm. Don't give him what he wants." Jasmine nodded, but inside, The fear was spreading like wildfire. Camille was right. Chief Callahan wanted them to react, to give him an excuse to shut them down. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. This was bigger than her now. She couldn't afford to lose control. Leo, who had been speaking to the crowd, turned to face Callahan, his megaphone lowered to his side, but his posture was resolute. "Can we help you, Chief?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with defiance. Callahan's eyes swept over the gathering, his hands on his hips. For a moment, he didn't speak, letting the weight of his presence hang over the square like a dark cloud. Then, with deliberate slowness, he turned his gaze to Jasmine, his lips curling into a mocking smile. Well, what do we have here?" Callahan drawled, his voice carrying through the quiet. "A little lemonade stand wasn't enough, huh? You had to bring the whole town into your drama." Jasmine's heart pounded in her ears, but she forced herself to meet his gaze. This was it, the moment she had been dreading, but also the moment she had been preparing for. She couldn't back down now. "This isn't drama," Jasmine said, her voice surprisingly strong. "It's about standing up for what's right. What happened wasn't okay, and we're here to make sure it doesn't happen again." A ripple of agreement swept through the crowd, and Jasmine felt a surge of support from those around her. Leo nodded approvingly, and Camille squeezed her hand, a silent message of solidarity. But Callahan wasn't done. He took a step closer, his boots grinding against the pavement, his cold eyes narrowing as he sized her up. "You think you can change things by throwing a tantrum in the middle of town? You kids don't know how the world works. There are rules, and you've broken them." Jasmine felt the heat rising in her chest, a mixture of anger and indignation. "We didn't break any rules. We're exercising our rights." Callahan snorted, his condescending smile never wavering. "Rights? You think you have rights when you're causing trouble in my town?" His gaze flicked to Leo, then back to Jasmine. "This little protest of yours is over. Disperse, or we'll start making arrests." The threat hummed in the air like a slap, and Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. Arrests? Was he serious? Her mind raced, and she saw the same panic flash across Camille's face. People in the crowd exchanged nervous glances, their resolve wavering under the pressure. Some began to step back, inching toward the edges of the square, unsure of what would happen next. But Leo wasn't backing down. He stepped forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "You don't get to intimidate us, Chief. We have every right to be here, and we're not going anywhere." The crowd seemed to rally around his words, their murmurs of fear shifting back to resolve. Jasmine could feel it too, the anger simmering just beneath the surface, threatening to spill over. But she couldn't let that happen. She had to keep a cool head. "Chief Callahan," Jasmine said, forcing calm into her voice, "this isn't about causing trouble. It's about making sure people like me aren't silenced or mistreated. We're not breaking any laws, and we're not backing down." For a moment, Callahan said nothing, his jaw tightening as if weighing his options. The other officers flanked him, their hands resting on their belts, clearly waiting for his signal. Jasmine could sense the tension building, the line between peaceful protest and confrontation becoming dangerously thin. Then, as if on cue, a voice called out from the back of the crowd. "Enough." The crowd parted as an older man stepped forward, his worn face etched with lines of experience and authority. Jasmine recognized him immediately. Mr. Rice, the town's long-serving councilman, and one of the few people of color in any position of power in Oakwood. He wasn't the kind of man who made public appearances often, but when he did, people listened. "Chief Callahan," Mr. Rice said, his voice calm but firm, "I believe these young people have every right to be here. And as far as I can see, they haven't broken any laws." The chief's eyes narrowed. "Councilman Rice, this is a disruption to public order." "No," Mr. Rice interrupted, his voice rising slightly. "It's a demonstration, a peaceful one. And as long as it stays that way, it will continue." A murmur of approval rippled through the crowd, and Jasmine felt a wave of relief wash over her. Mr. Reyes' presence was like a lifeline, a sign that they weren't alone in this fight. She saw Callahan's face darken, the authority he had wielded so effortlessly now slipping from his grasp. Callahan straightened, his lips pressed into a thin line. "This isn't over, Reyes," he said, his voice low but dangerous. "You're playing with fire, and it's going to burn you." Mr. Reyes didn't flinch. "Maybe. But right now, it looks like the only one getting burned is you, Chief." With that, Callahan jerked his head toward his officers, signaling them to follow. They hesitated for a split second, then turned on their heels and followed him back to the SUV. The crowd watched in silence as the chief climbed into the vehicle, his face twisted with barely concealed rage. The SUV's engine roared to life, and within seconds, they were gone, leaving behind a stunned but victorious group of protesters. For a long moment, no one spoke. The tension that had gripped the square loosened, and people seemed to exhale all at once. Then, slowly, a cheer began to rise from the crowd, growing louder and louder until it filled the air like a wave crashing against the shore. Jasmine felt a mix of emotions surge through her: relief, pride, exhaustion. She had faced down Chief Callahan and won, but she knew this was just the beginning. His parting words echoed in her mind. "This isn't over." Camille threw her arms around her, pulling her into a tight hug. "You did it, Jas," she yelled over the noise. "You freaking did it." Jasmine laughed, but the sound was shaky, as if her body hadn't quite caught up to the reality of what had just happened. She looked around at the crowd, at Leo, at Mr. Reyes, at the faces of people she didn't even know who had come out to support her, to fight with her. It felt surreal. Leo walked over, a broad grin on his face. "That was intense," he said, running a hand through his curls. "But you handled it like a pro." Jasmine smiled, though her legs were starting to feel like jelly. "I don't know about a pro," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I just did what I had to." Leo nodded, his eyes softening. "Sometimes that's all it takes." Mr. Rice approached, his face still serious but with a hint of pride in his eyes. "You've got guts, Jasmine," he said, his voice low enough that only she and Camille could hear. "Oakwood needs more people like you." Jasmine didn't know how to respond. She had always thought of herself as just a kid with a lemonade stand, not someone capable of sparking a movement. But here she was, standing in the middle of a crowd, having faced down the most powerful man in town. Maybe she wasn't just a kid anymore. The protest slowly began to wind down as people dispersed, but Jasmine knew this wasn't the end. It was just the start of something bigger, something that would take time, patience, and a lot more courage than she had ever imagined. But she wasn't afraid. Not anymore. As she and Camille walked home together, the sun setting behind them, Jasmine felt a quiet determination settle in her chest. The storm had broken, but the real fight was just beginning. Echoes of change. The following weeks were a whirlwind of activity and anticipation. The protest had ignited a fire in Oakwood that Jasmine hadn't expected. Each day brought a new challenge, but it also brought new voices joining their cause, and Jasmine felt the weight of her responsibility growing heavier. With Camille and Leo by her side, they transformed the once small lemonade stand into a command center for their movement. The trio spent countless hours strategizing, planning community meetings, and rallying support. Word spread like wildfire. The protest had gone viral on social media, and soon, people from neighboring towns were reaching out, eager to join their fight against injustice. It was exhilarating and terrifying all at once. One evening, Jasmine found herself sitting cross-legged on the floor of her living room, surrounded by colorful flyers and signs. She was exhausted, her mind racing with thoughts of what lay ahead. Camille and Leo were sprawled on the couch, engrossed in a debate about the best way to address the town council. "I'm telling you, we need to bring in more voices," Leo argued, his fingers drumming on the arm of the couch. "We can't just be three kids standing up there. We need to show them that the community is behind us." Camille nodded, her brow furrowed. I agree. But we also need to be strategic. If we flood the council with too many people at once, it might backfire. We have to be organized about this. Jasmine listened, her heart swelling with pride. They were no longer just a group of kids. They were a force, strategizing, and thinking critically about how to create real change. What if we organize a town hall meeting? She suggested, her mind racing with possibilities. We can invite everyone. Residents, council members, the chief, everyone who wants to talk about the issues we're facing. It'll give us a platform to express our concerns and share our ideas. Leo's eyes lit up. That's brilliant. A chance for everyone to speak out and be heard. But we need to make sure it's well advertised, Camille added, already pulling out her phone. Let's create an event page and start reaching out to local businesses for support. They can help spread the word. The energy in the room surged as they began brainstorming ideas for the town hall. They mapped out the agenda, ensuring every concern would be addressed. Policing policies, community safety, the need for more youth engagement in local government, and how to create a more inclusive environment in Oakwood. As the weeks flew by, the momentum built. The event was set for the last Saturday of the month, and the buzz around town grew palpable. Flyers covered every community board. Local businesses displayed posters in their windows, and word of mouth spread like wildfire. The day was a week away, and excitement mingled with anxiety as Jasmine reflected on how far they had come. But not everyone was on board. Chief Callahan had become increasingly hostile in response to their efforts. Rumors circulated about his threats to shut down their meeting, and Jasmine could feel the tension rising as the day approached. Despite this, she was resolute. She wouldn't let fear dictate their progress. Finally, the day of the town hall arrived. The sun hung high in the sky, casting a warm glow over the community center, where folding chairs had been set up in neat rows. Jasmine stood outside the entrance, taking deep breaths to steady her nerves as people began to trickle in. The hall soon filled with a mix of familiar faces, neighbors, friends, and supporters. But there were also new faces, strangers drawn in by the desire for change. "Look at this turnout," Camille exclaimed, her eyes wide with disbelief as she surveyed the crowd. "I can't believe so many people showed up." Jasmine's heart swelled as she took in the scene. They had done it, made their voices heard. "We can't let this go to waste," she said, determination flooding her veins. "We need to ensure everyone feels safe and encouraged to speak." As the meeting began, Jasmine took the stage, flanked by Leo and Camille. She felt the weight of the moment settle on her shoulders, but she straightened her back, reminding herself of why they were there. "Thank you all for being here today," Jasmine began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "This is our opportunity to share our concerns, to come together as a community, and to demand the change we deserve. Our voices matter, and together we can create a better Oakwood for everyone." The crowd erupted in applause, and Jasmine felt a rush of adrenaline. They were in this together. As the meeting progressed, voices echoed through the hall. Stories of personal experiences, concerns about policing and accountability, and calls for community engagement. Some spoke of their experiences with racism and discrimination, sharing stories that sent chills down Jasmine's spine. Each testimony strengthened their resolve and reminded them why they were fighting. And then it happened. Just as Jasmine was about to wrap up, the door swung open with a loud creak, drawing everyone's attention. Chief Callahan strode in, his expression steely and defiant. Jasmine's heart raced as he surveyed the room, a tension that felt electric sparking in the air. But instead of backing down, she stood taller, refusing to let fear creep back in. "This is a space for dialogue, Chief," she called out, her voice steady. "If you have something to say, you're welcome to share." The room fell silent, all eyes on Callahan. He hesitated for a moment, then stepped forward. "I'm here because I believe in law and order," he stated, his voice booming. "But that doesn't mean I don't want to hear what you have to say." Let's keep this civil. Jasmine's chest tightened, unsure of how the crowd would react. She exchanged a glance with Leo and Camille, and they nodded. They had come this far. There was no turning back now. "Let's talk, then," Jasmine said, her heart pounding. "If you truly want to listen, we're ready to speak. But we need you to be open and honest with us." Callahan frowned, clearly taken aback by her directness. But he nodded, albeit begrudgingly. "Fine. But let's be clear. We're not here to undermine the police. We're here to maintain order." A murmur rippled through the crowd, but Jasmine pressed on. "Order shouldn't come at the expense of our safety and rights. We need to address how policing affects our community. We're not your enemy. We're your neighbors. We want to work with you, not against you." The tension in the room was palpable as Callahan shifted uncomfortably, his bravado fading slightly. For the first time, it seemed as though he was genuinely listening. As the dialogue continued, people shared their experiences and feelings, some emotional and raw. They spoke of fear, distrust, and the hope for a safer, more inclusive Oakwood. Callahan listened, and Jasmine noticed the shift in his posture, how he no longer stood with arms crossed, but instead he seemed to be absorbing the words around him. Finally, Leo stood up, gesturing to the crowd. "We're asking for transparency and accountability. We want a community where we can all thrive, regardless of our background. That starts with communication and understanding between the police and the community." Callahan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck as he processed the sentiments being shared. "I can't promise that everything will change overnight," he admitted, his voice softer than before. "But if we're going to move forward, I need to understand what you want and what you need." Jasmine felt hope ignite in her chest. It wasn't the victory she had imagined, but it was a step, an opening for dialogue. The atmosphere began to shift, and it felt as if barriers were slowly beginning to crumble. "Thank you for hearing us, Chief," Jasmine said, her voice steady. "We're all in this together, and together is how we'll make Oakwood better for everyone." As the meeting concluded, the crowd erupted into applause, a powerful show of unity and determination. Jasmine felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the realization that they had made an impact. The journey was far from over, but they had taken the first step. As people began to filter out, conversations sparked with excitement and ideas for the next steps. Jasmine, Camille, and Leo stood together, their hearts full. In that moment, surrounded by the voices of a community rising up, Jasmine knew they were on the precipice of real change. They had faced fear, pushed back against authority, and found their strength in unity. And together, they would continue to echo the cries for justice and equality until every voice was heard.